Time now for our news review. We'll begin with Gulf News, and it's reporting all the papers have this, the surprise move by President Vladimir Putin, who says the bulk of Russian forces are going to be withdrawing from Syria from today. The president saying that essentially mission accomplished in Syria.
The Independent has a stark warning from scientists about global warming. New NASA figures show that in the month of February, it was the warmest month ever on record, and it's looking to be the hottest year, 2016.
Gulf News Business reporting on a new 10% tax on the profits of companies in Kuwait as the country tries to rely less on the money it gets from oil.
The International New York Times writes about the downturn in the Chinese economy. It looks at a surge in workers protesting and going on strike because companies are cutting pay and slashing jobs. Authorities are allegedly cracking down on the picket lines. And
staying with China, an insurance company there has put in a massive $13 billion bid to take over the Starwood Hotels group. The FT reports that this is part of a rush by Chinese businesses to buy up overseas assets.
And a British pharmaceuticals company has announced it's trialling an experimental cannabis-based drug which is shown to lower the number of seizures in children who have a rare form of epilepsy. That's in The Guardian.
Oliver Cornock is with us this morning, managing editor at Oxford Business Group and Middle East expert, fair to say?
Thank you very much.
Morning, Oliver.
Good morning. I think this is a fair question. Is it a good thing or a bad thing that the Russians are withdrawing from Syria?
It's very difficult to say. As we've looked at the headlines this morning, we've seen headline writers scrabbling for the word surprise, different words for surprise, because it is a baffling move, isn't it? And it's very difficult to see whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. What is certain, though, is Putin has a stake at the negotiating table now, and he's also secured his involvement with the Syrian situation. And of course, that's been something Russia's been very keen to do. It's part of this continual influence that Russia's looking to build within the region. And he's certainly bolstered his ally Assad. But whether it's made the situation any easier, whether it will make the negotiations that are about to start again any easier. And remember, there is no plan B at the moment, and that's what's very concerning for those of us who watch this. There is no plan B. So the negotiations that are beginning now, there's nothing else behind. So we really have to hope that this will give some impetus, and that has been some of the more moderate, some of the easier analysis of this decision has been perhaps that this will help those coming to the negotiating table to make some sort of decision, because actually if there is less Russian involvement, perhaps Putin will be more inclined to take a conciliatory stance over some things.
Give me a 5-second analysis of Russia's economy. 5 seconds.
Well, that's quite hard in 5 seconds. Contracting dramatically, oil revenues down significantly, and of course international sanctions still in place.
Exactly. Perfect, right? So people are saying that it's because the economy is in such a bad state that he's being forced to do this.
And you can't ignore that, 100%. Any of these oil economies, as we'll come to later, as you know, we've been talking about this now for a long time. Russia's economy is in a parlous state, and you can't help wondering whether there are people in the Kremlin saying, all right, we need to trim our sails.
OK, we'll watch closely, especially what's happening in Geneva, these talks beginning, indirect peace talks.
This story on the front page of The Independent is quite scary, isn't it?
Very scary.
I looked at this headline and read this today, and I thought, this is not good news at all. It would seem we are not winning in our battle to reduce or to stop the climate change problem.
What was interesting for me as somebody, with an organisation, we look at emerging markets. That's what Oxford Business Group does. And climate is incredibly important. Remember, we've been talking also about food security for a long time. And these things are hugely important to these economies that are, in more straitened times than they've been in for quite some time. The other element is also they mentioned the Middle East as well. Yeah. In some places, 5-degree surges on summer temperatures. If you're looking suddenly forward 10 years, 15 years to the involvement of solar power, alternative energy sources, this is a massive pressure on new technology that has to be built in. And that's just a small part of this global picture, as you say, Sally, which is so scary.
I mean, you would, I bet that those that organised the Paris talks in December last year would have hoped and prayed. This came out just before those negotiations, 190 countries trying to decide on a future strategy.
I think that's very true. Also, is there a danger as well, as you just said, of people not getting bored but getting a bit complacent with this story? It's been around for so long. El Nino is something we're very familiar with.
I think the issue is not so much boredom, it's just the discouragement. There isn't any signs that all the changes we're all making, all the recycling we're doing, all the things, the behavioural changes that we are making in many, many countries around the world is not seemingly having an effect, although maybe it'd be a lot worse than it is now if we weren't doing that.
I think that's a really good point, actually. It's about behaviour, isn't it? It's about human behaviour. Do we want to give up all of those things that we buy that contribute to, poisoning the atmosphere? Kuwait follows on from, I think the last time you were here, we talked about something similar, some sort of tax being imposed in the United Arab Emirates, and now Kuwait is doing, is this a similar move?
It's a similar move in the sense that everybody in the Gulf, the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, are all trying to diversify their income revenues on the back of lower oil prices. And each Gulf country has a break-even price per barrel. And Kuwait is widely thought about $50 a barrel. So the deficit's going to be significant this year. Remember, though, that most of these countries have run quite significant surpluses for a while. That suddenly turned in quite a dramatic way, as we all know. So when we were last talking, it was about the idea of a value-added tax, a VAT. This is a corporate tax of 10% on companies in Kuwait. It's just part of this ongoing bid to try and diversify income streams.
Interesting, though, economies like Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, which are, facing challenges because of the oil revenues going down, they do have a lot of things they can do to help boost their economy and shift their economy. Unlike Japan, we were talking earlier, where it's in dire states, but it's running out of tools,
They do, but they also have quite delicate social contracts that need to be maintained.
Does being a sheikhdom or a monarchy or whatever system of governance they have in the Middle East, most of those Gulf countries are not democracies. Does that make a difference to their economic processes?
Well, of course it does. It means that actually on one level they're quite nimble and can make some quite ruthless decisions in terms of economic policy and monetary policy. At the same time, they have to also take their people along with them in a slightly different way. And that's the balance, that's the rebalancing we're seeing at the moment.
Yeah.
International New York Times looks at what's happening in China. Workers who are being either laid off or facing more difficult contracts or lower wages as a consequence of that economy shifting. They are protesting, they are showing their angst, as it were, and it's a whole new world for China, isn't it, having to deal with this enormous shift in how that economy functions and the fallout from that and how they tackle it.
Absolutely. This sort of statist approach to huge industrial working is changing, it seems. And once wages and benefits are held back, no wonder people are protesting. But of course, equally, no wonder the Chinese authorities are coming down on that quite hard. The broader question, though, has to be, of course, we've been discussing this for a long time, the slowdown of the Chinese economy. Is this starting to trickle down to a much lower level?
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about Anbang.
Who'd ever heard of Anbang?
I know. Well, I
Incredible.
had,
Here
because of course they bought a US hotel group a year or so ago. So we had heard of them. They were on our radar. But it would seem they're not holding back. They're going.
And they'd also tried, remember,
stealing a march.
An approach on Starwood hotels last year, actually. So this isn't something that's wholly surprising. What, of course, is surprising is that already this year, I think something over $100 billion worth of these sorts of mergers and acquisitions deals from China have gone on already.
Would it be backed by the state? Is it the state saying, yes, go abroad and buy assets? Because you know what, with our slowdown here, you're going to be safer.
Well, Anbang is actually funded by insurance premiums,
yes,
which is a model that...
But when you spend this much money in China, do you have to get state approval? Or?
No, I don't think so.
I don't know. I think this article does very clearly say, though, that the company does have quite close ties with
yes. I thought in a centrally controlled economy everything had to go through.
Well, I think everything's changing in China, isn't it?
It certainly is.
It's a fluid place. It's all very fluid.
You know what? For years, people have said that coca leaves in Latin America should be used to make medicines and all sorts of other products, and here marijuana is doing something that they've been talking about with coca leaves. What a great story this is.
And again, we've been talking about this recreational use of cannabis and what a problem it is, and then also the positive sides of marijuana have also been talked about. And this is a really interesting story. I think anybody who knows anybody with epilepsy knows what a trying syndrome, disease, whatever you want to call it, this is.
And it's
with
also
a child, even
fatal.
Worse. And it can be fatal,
Can be
of course.
fatal,
Yes.
absolutely.
And so this is really interesting. Is this the beginning, I wonder, of a rehabilitation of marijuana as for medicinal use?
It's got to
well
be.
be.
It's got to be. If you can do this with drugs, it also gives the growers in Latin America, those guys who grow coca, they've got nothing. They sell it for a tiny amount of money and then it becomes the street drug in the United States. So if it can be used for these purposes, I'm talking before you have a chance to say anything, Ollie, because we have to say goodbye to you. Thank you very much indeed. Oliver, it's always a great pleasure to have you on the programme. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching.
See you
Bye-bye.
soon.